Well, we've already spoken about that appalling double murder outside the Randburg Magistrates Court. A woman and her husband gunned down as they were going into court to testify against 4 police officers, in fact. We also, of course, have heard about the Transport Minister and what happened to her and her bodyguards on the N3 earlier this week. But this case is particularly traumatic, the one I'm about to tell you about, and that is the rape and murder of a young Johannesburg teacher. Kirsten Kluyts was taking part in an organised fun run on Sunday, the 29th of October. It seems she was apprehended, raped and murdered in the George Lee Park. Now, this is a park, if you know Johannesburg, it's in the Sandton area. It is a safe park. It's where people go with their families. It's where lots of organised fun runs happen. So the fact that a woman is not safe when she's on an organised run with a whole group of people, a woman is not safe even when she's surrounded by armed bodyguards, makes one wonder where we are safe as women in this country. And I'm joined now by a researcher at the Faculty of Humanities at Wits University, Lisa Vetten. Lisa, thank you so much for coming through to us. You know, the reality, if we just focus on the Kirsten Kluyts situation, rape and murder in South Africa is horrifyingly commonplace. That's the tragic truth. But we still expect certain areas to be quite safe. You know, Kirsten Kluyts, she was on an organised run. There was obviously a whole group of people. It was on a Sunday morning. Transport Minister surrounded by bodyguards. I mean, you know, the Transport Minister was not in any way assaulted. So, I mean, you were making the point before we went to air. It could have happened to anyone, male or female. The reality is, as a woman, she probably presumed she was safe. She certainly wasn't. Kirsten Kluyts was raped and murdered. Are there just simply no safe spaces for women left in South Africa?
I don't think spaces are safe for anybody in South Africa, male or female or non-gender binary identifying. But I think some spaces are very much more unsafe for women than they are for men. And I mean, one of the spaces that are, and one of the most unsafe spaces for women is their homes. I think, you know, with murders like that, of what happened to Kirsten Kluyts and to the Cindy Chikunga, the Minister of Transport, often frighten us so much more because they happen in public. And I think women, very much more than men, are much more fearful. I think the way in which we emphasize crime against women sometimes has the unintended effect of making women intensely fearful and much more careful about their movements, what they do, who they trust and what they do. It's an unintended consequence of, I think, good intentions to emphasize the risks that women face. But what it can sometimes do, the emphasis outside, is perhaps lead us to overlook the risks that they face at home, at the hands of men they know and their partners typically.
No, fair enough. And that's an absolutely important point, because the truth is people are often murdered by those they know, either loved ones very close or acquaintances. In this particular case, clearly, you know, she came from a loving family, and it doesn't seem at this point, and we don't know the details of the investigation, that this was anything other than a random horrific crime. It does make one wonder, though, as a woman, like, is there a safe space to exercise, for example? Because, you know, we do want to try and continue to live our lives. Yes, as women, we need to somehow try and make sure we're not living with abusive partners, which is sometimes very difficult, I think, for women who are trapped in those situations. But for women who are living their lives and want to exercise, it looks to me, and you've got the detail on this, are there less and less safe places for women to exercise freely?
Yes, and I think this is, it goes to the point your journalist was making beforehand, is there are some very basic steps we can take around environmental design that would make external environments safer. But I think because of the decay of our parks, for example, the decay of our roads, the absence of security, things are not safe when they could be made safer. So I think, for example, another classic example is public transport. Women need to catch public transport to go to work every day. They often need to be leaving sometimes at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're coming home when it's dark. Often they're walking through areas where there is no lighting at all. The grass hasn't been mown for months. There is no security. We're asking them to run risks that they really should not. So I think there's a lot of those kinds of very simple, basic things that if our municipalities are more functional, might be making much more of a difference. I think the other thing that one can do sometimes is do things that you call using geographical information systems that help you, if you have a large number of crimes, that you can map them and start to understand where are spaces unsafe, but also to understand when they become unsafe, because there are particular times of day where something might become more unsafe than at other times. So there are ways we could definitely manage environments a whole lot better in order to make them safer.
Yeah, and I think what's so disheartening about Heidi's story is that Elias Mawela, the provincial police commissioner, flagged crime hotspot roads 2.5 years ago, and he told Heidi today that nothing was done about them. That's really disheartening because, as you say, those are basic things that could be attended to. You know, Lisa, we're just a few weeks away from the 16 days of activism against abuse of women and children, and there's always a huge focus on gender crimes and how we make our spaces safer. I wonder if you could do a stock take for us as we're about to go into that period. Compared to last year, what has changed for the better in terms of safety from crime in this country, specifically for women?
You know, I think, and politicians are especially guilty of this, we are so good at the rhetoric. Everybody knows how to say the right things. I think phrases like enough is enough, if I hear them once more, I switch off the radio, television, whatever it is, because we are so good at saying the right things. But doing, that's where we're simply not accomplishing what we need to do. And I think what has become very concerning is that we did see shifts and downturns in the number of violent crimes happening to women, both in relation to rape and murder. They were definitely moving down towards around 2020, 2021. But in the last 2 years to 18 months, there's been a spike, and they are on the way up. The problem with, I think, so much of what we do is we say the right things, we go on and on about this rhetoric, but we fail to analyze what is driving this. What is it that has changed and shifted in order to make things more unsafe? Because clearly they were safer at one time, but we don't know why, and now they're unsafer. That means we're in a situation where we don't have the kind of crime intelligence and data that would tell us, is it the murders of women by men they know, or rapes by men they know? Is that what's on the increase, or is it something that's going with strangers? Are some of these crimes attached to the broader surge we've seen around stranger attacks that are attached to things like struggles over taxi routes, etc.? What is the context in which these increases are happening to women? Because if you don't have that information, then all you do is stand up, wring your hands, say how absolutely shocking this is, how terrible it is, and you've done nothing meaningful about the problem. Although maybe you feel better because you've said how shocked you are. And we cannot continue like this.
I agree. And Lisa, I think, we feel sick to our stomach when that rhetoric comes out because nothing is changing. The data, of course, is meant to be contained in some of the crime stats we get now quarterly. But I would imagine you also drill down a great deal into those specific situations and the trends that are emerging. Lisa, if you had to ask for one change to be made in terms of whatever it is, just to make women specifically feel safer, what would you urge government to do?
I wish it was only one thing, but the thing is, what's going to make a difference here is a combination of things. There is not one thing that's going to make a big dramatic difference. So I think if we do things like take a look at the crime stats, they are not used to their full strength and capacity in terms of what they could be doing. So I think there'd be work that could be done around that, around much better mapping, around much better trend analysis. With that, we become different styles of policing. I think one could look at how does one work using that information. How do you then work with communities in order to create very different systems of safety and intervention? We're now about to see the Minister of Finance impose these very significant cuts, for example, these budget cuts. That's going to have disastrous effects, I think, on services to women. Where will they go? What will happen to the shelters that have assisted them? So I think we must look very, very carefully at these significant budget cuts that are going to be imposed, and think about what is the consequence going to be for women's safety? What do we do about those in order to ensure that we don't create more, for short-term pain, create even longer-term social dysfunction and difficulty? So I think something that is much more concrete and informed by evidence rather than just rhetoric would really get us a whole lot further, and I think also changing the nature of our plans. So living in a rural area, the kinds of risks and the scenario that you may face there would be quite possibly different to living in informal settlement, to living in Sandton, for instance. So it's beginning to also disaggregate and understand local dynamics so that we can start to adjust and fix based on what is the experience here, which is not going to be the same experience as there, which is going to need different kinds of interventions.
Yeah, so a much more nuanced approach and data-driven approach is required. Thank you so much for chatting to us. That was researcher at the Faculty of Humanities at Wits University, Lisa Vetten. Do stay with us. Plenty more still to come on SA Tonight.